it is the work of many that will achieve what we're all trying to achieve. And my journey to this came, as you've heard, through the work I have done for many years with those who are on the margins. And I often say our prisons are full of the people who are failed by every other system, from the child welfare system to the education system. And if we're talking about Indigenous people, we all know of the impacts and the trauma of residential school and the intergenerational impacts, to the social services systems, um, to the economic systems, the healthcare systems. And so when you go into a prison, you actually don't see, if the law was applied equally to everybody, you would see a cross section of our community, because there are many people. Most of us, by the time we reach the age of majority, have done something for which we could be criminalized, yet most of us are not. And that's not because we shouldn't be held accountable. It's often because of our level of privilege and opportunity and the supports we receive from others. Don't get me wrong, I'm not suggesting we criminalize more people, quite the opposite. I'm suggesting that when all else fails and there are no other resources available, we are quick to criminalize those who are struggling, whether it's because they're homeless, because they're struggling with past trauma and anesthetizing themselves with drugs or alcohol, whether it's people who are really struggling with mental health issues. That's who fills our prisons, and many people who have been raised or who are find themselves suddenly plunged into poverty, and often deep poverty. So that's how I came to this issue. I looked at what was happening, and after years of working with folks in the system, it became very clear. And in fact, almost every resolution that we passed in the last 15 years that I was with the National Office of the Elizabeth Fry Societies, everyone included things like national standards for social, economic, and healthcare, and a specific recommendation about guaranteed livable income. And that really came from recognizing that nowhere in this country, in no province, no territory, because it's a provincial jurisdiction, social assistance rates, in no part of this country are the resources provided through our social assistance programs sufficient for people to live on. And so it creates an infinitely criminalizable group, in the sense that if they are monitored, if what they're doing to survive poverty is documented, they can. And for many years, too many have been criminalized. As there have been deaths in custody, as there have been more underlining of these sorts of issues, there have been fewer criminalizations and incarcerations. But as I don't need to tell any of you here, poverty isn't the crime. It's what you do to navigate that poverty that causes you to come into basically to be captured by the criminal legal system. So that's the background to how I came to look at this. And then through that process, recognizing that Canada has had experiences with this. I mean, everybody on this call likely knows of the Dauphin experience, and thanks to Dr. Evelyn Forget for her incredible documentation and continued advocacy in this area. And we know that in the 1970s, it not only did the Mincome Project lift people out of poverty, it actually set people on a different path generationally than they were otherwise likely to be on. And we saw reductions in crime rates, reductions in victimization rates, reductions in hospital reliance, because of course, and in fact, that's partly how the interest of people like Dr. Forget and many other physicians was captured, was the fact that we're seeing increased reliance on the emergency care systems when people don't have adequate income for their pharmacare, or adequate money to buy healthy foods, or have recreation and lifestyle that is contributing to a healthy environment. So we saw that, and we saw that the only people, contrary to the often the stigma that people can, as Hugh Siegel said, people need bootstraps need boots. Responding to the classic adage, I would say incredibly classist view that you can just lift yourself up by your bootstraps, just pull yourself out of poverty. If that were true, there would be virtually nobody in poverty, because I don't know anybody who says, yeah, I'm signing up. I'd like to be poor for a while. It's just not a reality. And yet it's one of the big discriminatory attitudes that exists. And what we saw with the Mincome Project, and saw again with the Ontario pilot, when the Premier Wynn's government introduced the pilot, which Premier Ford agreed to continue, but then reneged on his election promise. We saw that crime rates went down, victimization rates went down, homelessness reduced, and health care and costs reduced as well. I know that if we carried that on for another number of years, in every jurisdiction, we would also see lower imprisonment rates. Because increasingly, as the data just out of Ontario alone just recently showed, 85% of the women in custody in provincial jails in Ontario are awaiting trial. And predominantly, as I was speaking to folks who are working in those systems, predominantly these are people who are jailed because they're homeless. Even though you're not supposed to jail someone for being homeless, the reality is the grounds that exist are you're afraid someone's going to recommit an offense, or you're afraid that they won't show up for court. Those are the grounds that you're supposed to put someone in custody. And even if they're going to reoffend, if they're not going to reoffend violently, then you should be not considering it. Most people are jailed and are deemed to be an ongoing risk to quote, reoffend, is because they're poor, and because if they've stolen something to survive, the presumption is they may have to again, because is certainly criminalizing them isn't, or charging them with something, isn't going to increase their opportunities to get a job, to get a place to live, to get off the streets. And so we need to be looking at these realities as well. We also know through Dr. Zhao's research out of UBC with the cash transfers in Vancouver, that within a month, people who are receiving those cash transfers are no longer homeless. And within 3 months, many of them are working. And within a year, the government has saved net almost $1,000. Gross, they're saving closer to $10,000, because these are folks who then are often getting into employment. And some people, the one of the biggest challenges is people are saying, oh, everybody will just stay home and not work. And some examples are used. The fact that during CERB, or during the pandemic, some people who received the Canada Emergency Benefit of $2,000 a month, quote unquote, chose not to work. Well, what we know from the research is those who chose not to work, many of them were caring for other people, whether it's their children, people with disabilities, elderly family members, or others. Others were choosing to basically get retraining so they could get better jobs. And some of them were basically working, but under the table, and trying to get ahead and using that opportunity. If we want people to be declaring their work, if we want people to be improving their opportunities, if we want them to be sustaining the economy and their communities or families of choice, then we need to provide those sorts of options, not continue to limit them. And so we know from those examples that we can see something different. PEI, Prince Edward Island, the province on the East Coast, the smallest province, but has indicated they would like to. They passed an all-party committee, Conservatives to Greens, that they wanted to start a basic income on the island, but they need the federal government to come to the table. And it's to me, it reminds me of the situation when Canada was considering Medicare before it embarked on it. It took one province, Saskatchewan, deciding to just do it, and then the federal government came into, wanted to get in on the action, and before long, every province and territory also wanted to be part of it. I think the same thing will happen with this, but we're in this stage where it's incremental change. We've seen through the Canada Child Benefit that the federal government put in place to ostensibly to alleviate child poverty, that it actually lifted many families out of poverty. We've seen with the guaranteed income supplement for seniors, similarly, it's assisted folks. where the disability benefit has been a profound disappointment because it has been absolutely insufficient. But we had hoped it would be another incremental step. The thing is, we are tippy-toeing, baby stepping towards this. And what we really need is the push. And that's why I'm so grateful to you and UBI Works and to Commonwealth Canada for putting together this event and or highlighting this work at this time, because it really is, I think it will require the public to push politicians. Politicians want easy fixes that that look well, that are unfortunately sound simplistic. And when they sound simplistic, that often means that they aren't effective. And so things like the changes we're seeing, we're just going to put people who are homeless and in encampments in forced treatment. I've seen some of those units that are being built. They're jail cells. So pretending that we will continue to use the most expensive, least effective, and actually most dangerous way to address social problems and social issues and economic inequality, and not to mention racial and gender inequality, is, really, it's at its highest form, a lack of integrity. And when I've seen some of the recent calls, should we be actually holding criminally responsible politicians who run on platforms, lie, and then don't fulfill their economic promises? Well, that's fraud. And maybe we should start calling to account those who have indicated that they will address these issues. So, I think the bill, thank you for talking about Bill S-206 and all of the information we've developed, thanks to many of you who are involved in this. This, number of fact sheets that are available on our website. Some incredible young people, because I'm a techno-twit, have put together QR codes and things so you can access all of this material. And basically, all of the evidence shows this is the way we should be going, that we can cut poverty while also providing springboards for people to rebound out of poverty when they're temporarily there. And for folks who, for whether it's disabilities or because of other issues, are unable to otherwise be employed, it provides opportunities for us to do what Canada has historically dined out on internationally, which is to show that we are a humane, human rights upholding and promoting nation. And I think we saw during the pandemic that the EI system, the social assistance schemes, were not fit for purpose. Because the Canada Revenue Agency had some years ago started this idea of people being able to file their taxes online. Gee, even for me, that doesn't sound particularly novel as an idea, but it was those measures that allowed them to roll out the CERB over the tax system. And I think we pay taxes on a monthly or biweekly basis. We could also develop a system that cuts the administration costs and provides more upfront resourcing and allow the very human resources, the social workers who go to school, not to police people's incomes or morality, but they go because they want to provide supports, free up their time to stop administering these programs and instead to provide the supports people need. So I think we should look seriously at the costings that people like Dr. Zhao, like yourselves, like the parliamentary budget officer have done, and really continue to push on politicians like me and others, elected politicians, as well as those of us who are appointed, to do the right thing and not continue to put our heads in the sand and pretend that, wishing and hoping will make this issue resolve. So thank you
Thank
very
you very
much
much.
for.
Thank you, Senator. It goes without saying that many people in our movement and our community are so touched and inspired by the work that you're putting into this. It's just incredible that a member of our Senate like yourself is approaching this with such a total and comprehensive understanding of the different arguments for basic income. And I think the angle of shining a light on inequities in the penal system is it's not one that most people have really thought about. And so I think this is a very it's a pretty bulletproof, ironclad case for it. I'm kind of curious if you could give us a little bit of an inside look. What is the conversation or general understanding around the topic of guaranteed livable income on Parliament Hill like?
Well, one of the challenges is politically, it's not seen as saleable at the moment because everybody's worried about Cheeto Man to the south and what's happening with trade and tariffs and that sort of thing. And, the difficulty is we are leaving behind millions, depending on the figures you use and which poverty line figures you use. Anywhere from 3.5 to 5 million Canadians are just being left behind by all of the policies. And so when you consider that, it really is reprehensible and it's predictable that we start to see more of those people in the streets, in encampments. We see people who were previously housed or being supported in with mental health or addiction issues, with dealing with past trauma, increasingly not being able to access those services as our health system is oversubscribed in so many ways. And so people seem to find it acceptable to say, let's just jail those people or let's just make them go away. They may not even think about whether they're jailing people. And so it was interesting to me when I start talking to people about these issues. It is the rare politician that isn't in agreement with this, but isn't necessarily willing to be the one to lead the charge for fear that it will be not politically expedient, that it will require more information. It's not there's not a 2-second slogan that they can give at the door. It's actually a concerted, important conversation. But as some of you will remember, during the pandemic, 50 senators wrote uh, to the prime minister of the day, Prime Minister Trudeau, and said, this is a moment where we should really look at this type of approach. It was before the CERB and all of these options were cemented. But it was an idea that many people, many members of parliament signed on to. The reality now, though, is the focus has been moved off of that. And we seem to be back on this notion that somehow people are choosing to be poor. People are choosing to live without their basic needs. And I do have a huge worry that uh, we ignore folks at our peril. I lived through the convoy in Ottawa, and what I saw there was not just people who were more extreme in their ideas, but I saw people who were disaffected because of years of neglect, of inadequate funding of social services, of healthcare, of education services, people who were being left behind and not well served by our governments, and I say plural, whether it's municipal, provincial, territorial, or federal, and therefore being attracted to this idea that we could just all be self-sufficient by taking control. And I saw people were downtown who I would never have expected to be part of that whole movement, but they were being fed. They had a community of support and they suddenly felt they belonged. And the learning from that for me is that our governments have responsibility to actually be more inclusive, not exclusive, and include people so that the people trust the government again to take care of us. And I don't mean take care of us in a paternalistic or maternalistic or negative way, but to make sure when things are tough that we can rely on the government to take wise, considered, evidence-based choices, not just act in the best interests of those who have the most power and privilege.
I think for many of us listening to you speak right now, Senator, it's become clear why you've been able to garner support among your peers. The way you talk about it is just so convincing. I think one of the major contributions of the bill is that you have created this platform for national constructive debate. And we have seen a number of senators speaking for it and debating it in good faith. And I'm wondering, have you personally, in your interactions, seen any of them go from skeptical to a supportive stance?
Yeah, I mean, when I first started, I approached a number of senators who were very involved in economic economic issues and things like offshore tax evasion, securities, numbered companies, and organized crime. And so I started to have discussions with them because one of the reasons I went on the finance committee is I thought, okay, if people are saying we can't afford it, I want to understand better what are we spending our money on. And, as Senator Percy Down from PEI has very astutely pointed out, his focus is offshore tax evasion. He looked at things like how many, who was being prosecuted, who was of the folks who were revealed in the Panama and Pandora papers. So I thought, well, that's a good question. So I started asking our Canadian officials, and what I found was even though people were named, even though we had evidence there, not one person has been prosecuted in Canada. So then Senator Downs said, well, he had a statement about his bill about tax evasion. And initially, when I approached him about supporting this, he said, "Oh, that's not my thing. I'm into this." And so I, spoke to him, and he mentioned that Iceland was one of the countries that had gone after people. So I thought, okay, I'm going to find out how they did that. So I called up, well, actually, more to the point, Emily in our office, got in touch with the folks in Iceland, and then I had a discussion with them. And it was basically, so I kept being told, I should say, yeah, the answers I was getting from Revenue Canada and Justice Canada was that, yes, there were people named, but they were complex investigations. It was very difficult. It was international. It was cross jurisdictional. So it all sounded, like possibly legitimate reasons that we hadn't gone after people. I talked to the Iceland folks, and it was three people, three key players that resulted in them getting, if not all, a significant portion of their monies back. An investigative journalist who went after and broke the issue. Well, we've had that. And then two prosecutors who investigated. And I said, well, how difficult was it to get the agreement of the international bodies? They had full agreement. When they went to Luxembourg, to Liechtenstein, to Switzerland, and they identified these are the folks who we think have been, putting their money in against our laws, our tax laws, in your banks or in your companies. We'd like access and we'd like your assistance. Guess what? They got full cooperation. So the fact that we're being told it can't be done is ludicrous. And as I don't know if this is exactly why Senator Down came on side, but there are many other senators interested in these issues as well. They came on side and they said, basically, if we crack this nut, we can fund all of that and more that you're interested in. And so I've been working with them, and I think none of us achieves anything alone. I mean, I may be the face of some of this, and sometimes the voice, but I know very well it's the work of all of you. It's the work of my colleagues. It's the interplay of these issues that will get this moving. And so I am incredibly grateful that I have so many colleagues who, started out because it was an issue of they're interested in violence against women, for instance, or they're interested in, Senator Cormier, who's very interested in the arts, and just recently asked a question of Minister Haju about. Um, a basic income for artists, and we saw during the pandemic all the free work that people did, or I should say uncompensated work that people did to entertain us and to keep our hopes up. And so, increasingly we're seeing groups sometimes coming because they represent other issues where there's intersection, and sometimes because they've been working on it themselves for a long time. And other times it just happens to be the confluence of, ideas. And we think, oh, well, this is one, we've now said, okay, well, we could be funding this if we deal with offshore tax evasion, organized crime, going through numbered companies, deal with this money laundering issues. We don't have to talk about raising taxes. We don't have to talk about, impinging more on people who are already doing this. And then just recently I had through one of the senators newly appointed in Quebec, I was in touch with someone she knows and works with, who's talking about tax equality of the rich and the poor, and is doing research around how much that the wealth, I think if I've got the numbers right, the wealthiest 10% in this country pay the same amount of taxes as the poorest 10%. That's uncomprehensible to me. How could the poorest people be putting more, the same amount as the richest people into our tax coffers? And she laid it out. We didn't used to have, things like GST and sales taxes. We could only have luxury taxes if we wanted to really make it a more equal process. We could take it off, like we've taken it off some things, take it off all the things that everyday people need, and so she has some great ideas, and so I'm still learning every day. I'm learning from again, folks like you, but also folks I'm working with in the Senate who come with all of their experience as well.
And that is just incredible how you described you the platform that you created. There are all these organizations and senators that have suddenly come forward and realized that they see it a certain way and they want to contribute to this debate that maybe I or you haven't thought about. I think it's just incredible. Um, I'd like to ask a question for the advocates here as the bill is going to committee. For those who are not too as familiar with the legislative process, what can we expect out of this? And is there anything we could do as voters, constituents to support your efforts during this process?
That's a great question, and thank you so much for asking it. Um, Not everybody on the committee supports the bill. There are certainly some folks, I don't always know who is speaking out against, but certainly when you see it being sent back to finance, I asked for the bill this time to go to social affairs because I thought, okay, we looked at all the, well, not all the we looked at a number of financial issues last time. It then got hung up because it's where the budget bill goes. It's where the supplementary estimates goes. It's where, and the practice in committees is government bills always take precedence. So in a committee like the Finance Committee, it's going to be really hard to get this bill through the study phase and out the door to third reading and over to the House of Commons. So we had tried to get it to go to social affairs. The reason I know there's opposition is if people wanted it to get through, they would have agreed with that. And so that was my first clue. Now there's again the old tried and trite and not true tropes about that, it's going to it's going to create inflation, it's going to stop work, all of those things. So I'm not on the finance committee now, so it's harder to challenge those as they're coming up, but the tropes are there. And so anybody who's interested, I would welcome, get in touch with the senators who are, start with the ones on finance and encourage them to rethink, ask for a meeting with them to talk about their support or lack thereof for the bill, as well writing to them. Mass emails. I mean, there is a mass email campaign against the bill right now. I'm trying to remember what this one is claiming. Usually it's something about saying that because in the preamble I talk about the need for national standards. And what I mean by that is it used to, before the Canada Assistance Plan was repealed, we used to be arguing for improved national standards to raise the standards. But some folks during the pandemic went down one rabbit hole, which was to say, that was code for I was going to require or urge the government to require everybody to have a vaccination or everybody to have to do X, Y, or Z, have some kind of special review. I mean, it's nonsense. What I meant was adequate, needed to be defined, sometimes regionally, sometimes, provincially, sometimes territorially, but it was really about providing an equitable approach. And so that's an area that you may see some people. Anyway, my point about that is mass writing campaigns often then get siphoned off. There's the folks who do all of our internet. put in something and programs it off. So mass campaigns and that are all the same message aren't always effective. Some people pay attention that their mailboxes are clogged. But really the personal interaction and talking one to one with, if you have time, is really helpful. If you don't have time, just sending a note saying you support it is great. So whatever people are able to do, there's no action too small. And if you can, actually try to get meetings with members of parliament and senators, that would be great. If you know people in the income sphere, banking, those sorts of areas who you can try and encourage to get on side. If you know someone in Prime Minister Carney's inner circle, all the better. Those are not the contacts that I have. So any of you have that, I think is incredibly helpful.
Well, you heard it here. There's no action too small. And if you could find a way to get a one-on-one with members of the Finance Committee, I think we're on that. Thank you, Senator. On behalf of all the advocates watching, we really appreciate all the hard work and heart that you put into this. And I'm sure we'll all continue to support your efforts however we can.
You are most welcome. Thank you. And thank you for inviting me. And if I don't cark it before, I don't plan to quit, but if I don't cark it before, I've got 9 years to try and get something through. So hopefully it'll be long before that. But thank you very much to all of you.
Thank you. Everyone, wherever you are, please put your hands together for the Honorable Senator Kim Pate.